Okay. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Maria Safiotti Dale. I'm the chair of the events committee of the Friends of the UW-Madison Libraries, and I want to welcome you to tonight's event. Before I launch into my welcome remarks, I just want to remind you that at 6 o'clock, after the panel discussion, we will have some light refreshments at 6 o'clock. I mentioned that. And that the restrooms, if you need them, are around the corner over on this side. So, for 77 years, the Friends organization has been championing our great library system here at UW-Madison. We are an all-volunteer organization that strives to bring visibility to campus libraries and to the world-class collections that they hold. We see ourselves as critical connectors with the Madison community and champions of our great UW-Madison libraries. You may be aware of our semi-annual book sale. The next one is just around the corner, October 22nd to 25th in Memorial Library. And we'd love to see you there. We also take book donations, and you can find more information about all of that on our webpage. Proceeds from the book sale support grants to scholars who come from around the world to use the exceptional collections in our libraries, as well as funding for a wide array of free public events and lectures such as this one. You may have noticed that some refer to this particular lecture as the Schewe Lecture. In 2006, the Friends were granted an endowment fund from Douglas Schewe with a specific charge, quote, to encourage the campus and the larger community to read print books and to host speakers with sound, balanced academic scholarship, encouraging the diversity of study or contemporary literary merit, and in furtherance of the sifting and winnowing principles of the University of Wisconsin. We hope to do just that tonight. We are also grateful to our co-sponsors for this event, including the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, the Department of Medical History and Bioethics, as well as the UW-Madison Library's Dean's Office. Speaking of, I would like to introduce to you our UW-Madison's Dean and Vice Provost of Libraries, Dr. Erla Haynes. Dr. Haynes received her doctor's and master's degree from the School of Library and Information Science at Indiana University, a master's degree in advanced clinical practice from Syracuse University, and a bachelor's degree in history and Afrikaans Dutch literature from the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. She led teaching and learning work for Purdue Libraries, focusing on campus engagement, collaborating with associate deans and other leaders involved in student success. She has worked with librarians and staff to develop new ways to integrate the work of librarians with academic departments and has taught undergraduate and graduate courses on mentoring at Purdue and mentoring workshops nationally. Erla.
Good afternoon. Let's see. I'm trying to be in two places at once. Can you all hear me okay? So it's a pleasure for me to be here this evening and to welcome all of you. As Maria said, I'm Erla Haynes. I'm the Dean and Vice Provost of Libraries. I've been here for 1 year and about 9 months now, so still quite new. But I'm very proud of this institution and the amazing work that happens here. I'm going to put my glasses on. So it's an honor for me to be here tonight and to see such a rich and lively community come together around this very fascinating topic. And thank you to our friends of the Libraries Board for supporting this event. We really appreciate the work that you do and supporting us and bringing community together, not just in the library, but also the broader community. Before I hand this off to our speakers, I want to say a few words about the collaborations that's behind this event and the exhibit that you'll be seeing this evening. It's important for a few reasons. UW-Madison libraries remain committed to bringing the impactful work and stories being done here behind the stacks and behind the archives, often what we do is invisible, to the public. We use different opportunities to highlight our excellent staff and experts and demonstrate the critical work that we do as connectors and partners on this campus and in this community. This word partner has been something that we have really embraced since I've become dean here, really talking about the partnerships that we have on campus. And we have many, many examples of exciting and wonderful partnerships as our libraries continue to expand and integrate into the community, into the campus work. Historical curation work takes place in many locations that are not apparent at first, and they go beyond traditional historical records to include a comprehensive look at people in their home contexts, in their communities, on campus, and in the lab, to give a richer understanding of the people behind the discoveries, and an invitation for us to reflect on how we shape the future with experiences and practices from the past. And that exhibit, if you've had an opportunity to look at it, exemplifies that really well. We were honored to be invited by the Link family to curate the important items on exhibit today and thank them for their trust in sharing their family historical items with us. So thank you for that. We also want to thank the Link family for their generous donation of the exhibit case. Our librarians and archivists have developed a wonderful relationship learning about the items and the significance they pose in the family's history, the brilliant work of Karl Paul Link, as well as the legendary Discovery of Warfarin, of course, a moment that forever changed the trajectory of this campus. And it led to critical investments that made possible this very library that we're meeting in today. And so again, thinking about our partnerships and our connections on campus and the recognition of the important work that we do. Science and engineering librarians, Emma Bakulu. Emma is here. Jessica Newman, Deb Hellman, here from Steenbock Library. History and Science, Health Sciences librarian Hannah Swan from Ebling Library. That's our medical and public health library. Actually, it's our health sciences library, to be exact. Katie Nash, the head of UW Archives, brought their varied skills and expertise together to curate and design the exhibit. Worked closely with the Link family and the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, also known as WARF. And we're very glad to be able to welcome Andrea Banks, Karl's granddaughter, Tom Link, and Paul Karl Link, Karl's sons. Very happy to have you here with us this evening, who are joined by other members of the Link family as well. Thank you for all your support in sharing your memories with us and with everyone here. I cannot help but wonder what breakthroughs and discoveries we will be talking about in the next 10 to 20 years from now, and how hyper-collaborative spirit of this campus made those discoveries possible. Again, I always think about the library's connection and the connections that we make between people. It's very important. Karl Paul Link was a strong advocate of the fearless sifting and winnowing we embrace as foundations to this campus today. He was known for his defense of free speech and his aspiration to use scientific discovery for the greater good. He said, and I quote, "I try to do mankind good rather than destroy it." And as we'll learn tonight, the path to discovery in basic research is anything but straightforward. And there are critical points when focusing on the greater good can change the course of history. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the two panelists for this evening who will share more about this story. Doug Moe is an award-winning author of numerous critically acclaimed nonfiction books, as well as thousands of newspaper columns and magazine articles. In addition to his books and his work in journalism, he writes corporate, foundation, and personal histories, all with a signature storytelling style that has earned him a devoted following across more than 4 decades. His book, which is the focus of our discussion this evening, is titled Saving Hearts and Killing Rats. It's actually very easy to find this book online. You just say killing rats and the book shows up immediately. So it's good to have distinctive titles. Karl Paul Link and the Discovery of Warfarin. This is the subtitle of the book. The book has been honored by the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel Wisconsin Book of the Month and has been lauded for separating fact from fiction around the life of Karl Paul Link and his work. Kevin Walters is an historian and public affairs associate at the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. Kevin received his PhD in history from UW-Madison and brings a lens of historical analysis to his workplace, which is also celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. We thank you both in advance for the great conversation and insights you'll be sharing with us this evening. So, thank you.
So yeah, I don't know about sound and balanced, which came up in that first introduction, but we'll try.
Okay, yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Sifting and winnowing, sound and balance always go together. Sometimes you're a little unbalanced, but yeah, that works. So yeah, as I said in the introduction, I'm a historian for WARF. I actually wrote my dissertation about Harry Steenbock, and we're in the Steenbock Library, which that's exciting. I think, as we're about to find out, that's either very ironic or very appropriate. There's a display of Steenbock, but it's locked away in the conference room. I think Link might have had something to do with that. But and anyway, we'll see. So, Doug, yeah, I think we should just jump in because we've had great introductions. Generally, when I do interviews like this, I like to, being an historian, to go from past, present to future and kind of walk through what we're doing. But I think I actually want to start a little different because that's how your book starts. It's a biography of Karl Paul Link, but the first chapter is Farmer Carlson. So actually, I want to ask the audience, how many of you, first of all, have heard of Karl Paul Link before you showed up here? I'm guessing on, yeah?
Fair.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm guessing the ones up here have heard about it. Yeah. How many of you have heard the story about the farmer who drove in the snow and discovered warfarin? Okay, so there's some there, a few less. It's a pretty legendary story. My next question is going to be how many of you are taking warfarin right now, but that would be a HIPAA violation, so I'm not going to go there. But I think the reason why this is such a great story and why Doug noticed that it was a book that needed to be written is that story. So I think we just kind of start. If you just want to tell us the story.
Yeah, Karl Paul Link, it's 1933. He's a young biochemist at UW, has a career path in carbohydrate chemistry, and on a cold February morning that year, the weather got worse the longer Link told the story. But I did look up the. I found a February Saturday in 1933 where it was like way below zero and there was snow predicted. And in any case, Link happened to be in his lab in what was then the agriculture building. And a farmer named Ed Carlson, young man from St. Croix County, came down here to try to find the agricultural experiment station, which was designed to help Wisconsin farmers. And it was closed. Carlson's cows had been dying mysteriously. If they bumped barbed wire, they would almost bleed out. Their nose would inexplicably start bleeding just, for no seeming reason. And he'd lost a number of cows. And so he came down with what Karl Paul Link later called the disaster load, which was in his truck a dead cow, a bucket of cow's blood, and a bunch of sweet clover hay. And ended up meeting Link at his lab. And that began for Karl Paul Link a 7-year, essentially, journey with his graduate assistants to find out what it was in that spoiled sweet clover. They've spoiled sweet clover hay, wet, uncured, that was causing the cow's blood not to clot. And as I say, it took 7 years, a lot of work, 10,000 rabbits, I think. So it was, but it's such a good story, let's face it, right? I ended up, as I'm doing the book, I ended up contacting Ed Carlson's son, who was an emeritus professor from UW Stevens Point, and asked him about it. he had never heard it. Ed Carlson may well not have known that he has the guy that really launched this miraculous 20th century medical discovery. We're way pre-internet, right? But anyway, that was it. And there were doubters, as Kevin noted. I mean, people kind of wondered if that story was true. And we were able, my genealogist friend and I were able to find the Carlson farm up in St. Croix County. And there was a few newspaper articles from that time as well about the herd having all these problems.
Yeah. And so I'll point out that he was very close to St. Paul, but he came to Madison. So for all of you Gopher fans, we apologize, but there's a reason why. So he came because he was looking for the state veterinarian, right? And he was looking for, and he ended up finding the Link lab.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the story. I could maybe go a little further into that then. Kind of what happens next in terms of his graduate students. And so he's a carbohydrate chemist. Mm-hmm. I actually looked this up. Coumarin, which is the molded compound in the hay, is not actually a carbohydrate. It's a hydrocarbon, which apparently is.
I was an English major.
Yeah, Well, I'm a history major. This is why I was looking at Wikipedia today about this. I never really, but apparently those are completely different. And so he pivoted his entire lab to try to understand what this was. But tell us about the German graduate student.
Oh. Yeah, he had a German graduate student, 26 years old at the time, I think. And Link famously, the one I quote most in the first chapter of the book is Link gave a speech in 1958 in New York City in front of a big, august group of scientists where he kind of laid out this story. And his, help me with this, Shuffle?
Shuffle, yeah.
Yeah, was the name of this young German-American graduate student. And Karl, as Karl was wont to do when he gave a lecture, got very demonstrative, and Farmer Carlson really touched this German assistant. He was there that Saturday. And after the poor guy had loaded up his disaster load, or at least the cow, and gone back to St. Croix County, Shuffle turned to Karl Paul Link and said, the blood, and he goes into the German, it won't clot, but then he said, and at least Karl said this later, and again, it's pretty dramatic, but it might be true. He said, Shuffle said, this could be destiny. The fact that this guy showed up at our lab where he wasn't even looking to come, and we need to figure this out for him. And again, it did. It launched at 7 years. Dave Nelson, who I wish was here tonight, was from the biochemistry department and was a great assistance to me doing this book, and knew Karl well. In fact, Dave organized the extraordinary Link archive here at Steenbock. Along with Dave, the archivist here, where the book wouldn't exist without their help. They were fabulous. But Dave said that moment really turned Link's career 180 degrees. He went from studying onions to studying why wouldn't the blood clot?
And so then it takes 7 years, and by that point, Shuffle is no longer with the lab. He's not named on any of the patents. This leads to 23 different patents, and actually counted up that there's 11 different inventors. Actually, I think 12 with Link added to that. So it's a pretty comprehensive or a collaborative enterprise over a number of years. But what happened to Shuffle? You looked into seeing, did they stay in touch? And there were a couple of, I think you said that he contacted him later on.
Yeah, Shuffle ended up in central Wisconsin doing science of some kind. The one thing I most remember is that Link sent him in like 1966 a very warm note and $1,000 thanking him again for what he had helped with more than 3 decades earlier.
So I think that gets the dramatic story there. And I think one of the reasons I want to start there is because it is dramatic, and it is one that if you stay around Madison long enough and you talk to enough people in science, they'll tell you that story. But also being at Wharf and having told the story, sometimes, usually after that, I'll get an email from somebody who has a farm in Middleton saying, I think my dad was that farmer. And now I can tell them, no, it was Ed Carlson, and he was much further away than Middleton. And the farm didn't get further away. Like Karl did actually. There are people who doubted it. The grad student who wrote his biographical memoir said the farm got further away, and the weather got worse. Well, the weather might have gotten worse, but the farmer was real. And Doug has proved that for us. So that's the first solved mystery and service that Doug has done. So I think now that we've gotten that on the table, I kind of want to talk a little bit about where the book came from. So you've written more than a dozen books. So you have a nose for what makes a book. But how did this one come across your radar?
I knew of Karl Paul Link. I had done a newspaper column. I used to write a daily column here in Madison for each of the papers at one time or another. And in 2003, a Yale professor wrote a book on Joseph Stalin, and in the book postulated that Stalin had been killed by his generals giving him warfarin. And I read about that and thought, well, that's a great Madison link, connection, which of course every newspaper column you need a Madison connection. So I contacted this guy and I ended up writing the piece. We actually spoke on the 50th anniversary of Stalin's death in 2003. And Professor Joseph Brandt said, wouldn't it be ironic if the biggest rat of the 20th century, or one of them, was killed with rat poison? So I knew of Karl Paul Link. One day when I was still at the newspaper, Tom Link, Karl's son, came by, and I came down to talk to him, and Tom had some scrapbooks and other memorabilia type things, and asked if I'd be interested in maybe doing a biography of his dad. I had done a couple books by that time, but I was writing 5 newspaper columns, and I didn't at that time. I didn't act on it. Come 2015, and I'm invited not to return to the Wisconsin State Journal. I got back in touch with Tom, and we proceeded, and that's how that got started.
Right, that's the story. How the story is told. Yeah. So I was looking at it. I think there's a Wisconsin outlet newspaper, Madison newspaper anyway, that you've not written for. Is that right? Can you think of one? I think it's Isthmus and On Wisconsin.
Anybody would send me a check.
Yeah. Okay. Did you write for the Daily Cardinal?
I did, and the Badger Herald.
Oh, both of them. Okay. Yeah. So there's On Wisconsin and there's Our Wisconsin.
Yeah, both.
And all of those. So yeah, and 4,000 columns. So I was going to tell people if Doug hasn't interviewed you or written about you, you should probably look deep in your soul and wonder if you're newsworthy. But if the answer is yes, please give Doug a call, because he's still at it. So yeah, DougMoe.org, right? So, let's see. I think now we can kind of dive in, unless there's any other stories about how this came about that you wanted to talk to us.
No, that was, and again, finding the archive and finding that Dave Nelson had organized it as he had, and if you do get a chance to read the book, you'll see that I quote for quite a while during the first quarter of the book. Karl wrote about 50 pages of an unpublished memoir. So, and Dave, bless him, typed all the Karl's handwritten memoir notes into something that I could read, and it was tremendously helpful. So again, yeah, that was the most of the research. There weren't a tremendous number of people around to interview, to be honest with you. I mean, a couple of his later grad students I did. I interviewed Hector DeLuca, who's a famed biochemist here, who had come to study with Steenbock, but ended up taking a class or two with Link, and that was a colorful interview.
Well, since you brought that up, talk a little bit about what DeLuca had to say about lecturing styles.
Yeah, I think it kind of fit their overall personality. Steenbock was pretty buttoned down. Kevin, of course, wrote his wonderful dissertation on Steenbock. Buttoned down, kind of by the book, not one to want to rock the boat, and certainly not do it publicly. And Link was about the polar opposite. He didn't shy away from controversy. He liked reporters for the most part, and they just had different styles for sure.
So Link's display is out here, Steenbock's is back there. That gets the personalities.
Right.
I found the oral history of Karl Paul Link talking about Steenbock, and he said that Link said, "I'm Bavarian, he's Northern German. That tells you everything you need to know," and that Steenbock walked like a Prussian, and he walked so straight that he thought his head was going to fall off walking down the hallway. So yeah, they were.
Well, I found it, and then we don't need to dwell on this, but I in the oral history program, there's an interview with Ann Terrio, who was the receptionist or office manager, whatever you would call it, for biochem for decades. And she loved Karl, but she said, he just couldn't. There were some things. And she said one day he was in there talking to her. Karl was sitting in her office, the entrance to biochem, and Steenbock walked in, saw Karl Paul Link, turned, walked right out, and she said Karl grabbed like a Kleenex or something and threw it after him.
Yeah.
Like, let's go back to third grade. And she quickly said, that wasn't Karl most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah. Only for select audiences, yeah. Was Ann the one who was in the coffee shop when you walked in?
Yeah, on State Street. She related this. This would have been early 30s. And she and her girlfriends would meet in the State Street coffee shop, several days a week. And there was a guy that would come in, and he had like long hair and a scarf and a beret, and they were sure that he was some mad poet. And she ends up as the secretary at biochem, and the mad poet comes walking into the office, and of course it's Karl Paul Link.
So a legend on campus, and yeah. So let's go back then, and where did the legend come from, and how do you think his childhood shaped? So he's not actually from Wisconsin.
No, from LaPorte, Indiana, and this will just give you an idea of how a journalist or historian, nonfiction writer can get driven crazy. LaPorte, Indiana, the city has a space between La and Port. LaPorte County, they're together. I mean, give me a break. But the Link family was very interesting. 10 kids, I believe, and Karl's dad was a minister. So it was not a wealthy family by any means. In fact, quite the opposite, although I don't think they were, truly deprived of things. But one of Karl's, in an interview that I found with one of Karl's sisters, she said, but our house was filled with music and books. They did have a creative, personality, I guess I would say, kind of instilled in them. And Karl ended up, although he could be melancholic, and his dad died when he was 12, Karl ended up having the lead in the 2 class plays his senior year in high school. So the showman was there.
Yeah. And so there's some question about, obviously we don't have medical diagnoses or anything, but you kind of talked about how he would have mood swings. And what did you make of that?
I think that came probably later to a degree, but yes, a number of folks, we didn't know, or I shouldn't say that, but my understanding of bipolar disorder is that it was not really diagnosed as such until somewhat more recently. But he certainly exhibited those traits. The grad students that I was able to interview, said that he could be really up and upbeat, and it could depend on the season or the weather, and then he could be very down and morose. A lot of the postcards that I found in his archive that he wrote and kept copies of, were 3 a.m, which is interesting. So yeah, hard to say, but probably did have that kind of personality.
And that's another one of those things that people questioned, whether he was making up the times on the yellow notepad letters, but we don't think he did.
No, I don't think he made it up.
My favorites are the ones that I saw that were where he had the barometric pressure and the weather. And there was once they were building the VA hospital, and there was red dust in the air, and he said, some people say that the dust and the red sunsets are because of the VA construction. I think it's because Steenbock's blowing smoke out of his ears again. There was some controversy he was writing about those particular, but they were back and forth. We don't need to make the whole thing about Steenbock, though. So how did he get to Wisconsin then?
Well, I don't think he ever definitively said. His mother was a big admirer of Fightin' Bob LaFollette. His dad was born here. His older siblings had gone to the University of Chicago. But I think that's probably why he ended up here. And, it was interesting, why did he become a scientist? There was some thinking he was going to go into medical school, but again, it might have been an economic thing where he he ends up in ag chem, and told an interesting story about delivering the Capital Times when he was a student here, and and wrote this remarkable book. I don't know, it's too big for the exhibit. It was an oversized thing that he called Voices from the Seven, no, Dances from 7 years, about his time here. And it's a remarkable document. Tom Link was nice enough to share it with me when I was writing this. He printed out these beautiful handwriting poems of favorite poets. He wrote some prose of his own. He made drawings. And it was really interesting. He loved nature, that was clear, very thoughtful. And it was the work of a young 20s guy trying to decide where he was going to go with his life. Very interesting.
Yeah, okay. And then so I guess for the sake of time, so he gets his degree, he gets his PhD then at UW-Madison. And then I think the other way we can structure stories about Link is just to walk through the different controversies that were stories that lingered, but that you also dove into and kind of sorted out who did what, when, and where. I think the first one is the Scottish professor.
Yeah, Irvine was his name. Karl got a Rockefeller. He missed twice. He was second in line to get a Rhodes Scholarship and lost two times in a row. Rockefeller Foundation came forth with some money, and he did a postdoc over at St. Andrews University in Scotland. And his mentor there was named James Irvine, and he was like the guy at St. Andrews University, heralded. I don't know if he was knighted or not, but it was close. He was regarded as quite something. And Karl and he got along initially, but only a few months in really clashed. And Karl ended up leaving St. Andrews. Irvine tried to blackball him. And interesting, I thought, Karl did not back down. Here he's, faced with this controversy with a very powerful academic. And Karl, again, it wasn't exactly clear what had happened, but the two theories advanced by people that knew Karl well, one that Irvine had taken research Karl had done and claimed it on his own, for his own, and the other one was that Karl had disagreed with Irvine on a point of research and did it quite boldly and in a loud way. In any case, they did. They had this terrible falling out. It didn't work out all bad for Link, though, because he subsequently then went to a couple other places in Europe and studied with Pregel, who was a Nobel Prize winner, and by the end of his European stint ended up bringing microanalysis equipment that had never been across the Atlantic Ocean back here to Madison. And he ended up with a close relationship with Pregel and the other European scientist, Kerr, I think was his name.
Kerr.
Again, a Nobel laureate that Karl stayed friends with.
Yeah, that's Karrer.
Yes.
Yeah. And we don't know for sure that this equipment was essential to the warfarin discovery, but it gets you the kind of sense of what the type of science he's getting into, which is groundbreaking, breaking things down into their parts. So I think just to fill in a couple of the gaps about the farmer story was that this bleeding disease was well known. It was the Northern Plains bleeding disease. So it was known what was happening here. This farmer needed help, but veterinarians had known this, and it was ultimately then another UW professor named Brink, H.A. Brink, who develops a type of clover that doesn't spoil. And so this is a larger problem, but what Link does is actually isolate and then crystallize and synthesize the actual chemical, right?
Right, they called it the hemorrhagic agent, and it bedeviled him for, as I've said a couple times, 7 years. But it was one of his assistants, Harold Campbell, who actually found the HA, the hemorrhagic agent, and then they were able to make it synthetically, and they were off to the races with a human anticoagulant. And
so the first one they find is actually not warfarin, right?
Right. It's called dicumarol, kind of based on that coumarin that you mentioned, And it was interesting. The first magazine or newspaper story I found was a 1940s Cap Times story about just that they had found the hemorrhagic agents. It was on an inside page, like page 8 or something of the Cap Times, small stories. And right at the bottom it said there's a chance this might be able to be used for human medicinal purposes. Fairly quickly, they did some clinical trials here at UW and elsewhere, and dicumarol became one of the great, early human anticoagulants.
And this is where Worf comes in, because Link goes to Worf, discloses this, we call disclosing the invention, which is telling Worf, I have something that I think is patentable, that leads to the first patent. Worf then licenses it to a medical pharmaceutical company that develops dicumarol. And so dicumarol works well, but it's also, I think it's intravenously injected, and it has to be monitored. People have to be monitored very closely. And so then the Link lab is developing all of these analogs, which are different variations of the chemical. And so I guess pick up the story from there.
Well, Link struggled with illnesses all his life. And the one that put him in a sanitarium in 1946, tuberculosis was, and it was when he was there in the sanitarium at Lakeview over on the north side here, he started reading about the possibilities of rodenticides, and he actually, there was an English physician or scientist who had talked about maybe dicumarol being used as a rat poison, and of course Link flew off the handle there. He thought he wouldn't want a rat poison linked to, a human anticoagulant. How could that be? So as Kevin said, his grad assistants had made many compounds similar to dicumarol. 100 of them, I think. And there was one in particular that they ended up calling a compound number 42 that was quite strong. And Link said, well, okay, maybe this can be a rodenticide. And it proved to be enormously effective as a rodenticide. And again, to Worf's credit, they end up patenting it. And again, another controvery comes in with one of his grad students. But that's the short version of before warfarin ever happened for humans, it was a rat poison.
So yeah, there's a kind of fork in the story there, because one can be the controversy. I think for now we'll focus on, so warfarin becomes a very successful rodenticide, and it's kind of it's thought that it's too dangerous for humans, or that it's just not effective. But what's the story about how it?
I think it was 1952, and a young military man came stumbling into a naval hospital out east, and was ill, but upright, and it turned out he had tried to commit suicide by ingesting warfarin 5 consecutive days, and the medic there ended up getting in touch with Link and telling him, that this had happened, and it dawns on Link, and of course, as he's telling the story in his inimitable way. He said that the young man, it was not sufficient to have him shuffle off this mortal coil, which of course is Shakespeare, and Karl Paul Link would be quoting Shakespeare. So Karl has the idea that, okay, maybe compound 42 not only is a great rat poison, but maybe it can be a human anticoagulant. And they tweaked it just a bit. It was the water-soluble form of warfarin. They call it warfarin sodium, and they got on that. They got on making that, and quite famously, a few years later, it was prescribed for President Eisenhower after a heart attack, and that really helped it take off in the public eye.
But it wasn't publicly disclosed at first, right?
That Eisenhower had? No. Again, it was Eisenhower had a heart attack. And out in Colorado, he was president, and Link in his lab got a postcard from somebody who was in that hospital, who may have worked here in Madison, and said, they're giving the president one of your anticoagulants, and it is not dicumarol. So Karl knew, but they couldn't couldn't go public with it until, because the president's doctor wasn't saying what it was, and after all, it's the president. It was a couple of years later, actually, that at his New York speech, Karl broke the news, and it was front page news that warfarin had been used to treat President Eisenhower.
And so, just so everybody knows that because the substance at the core of this is coumarin, and then Worf had patented it, it was KPL who coined the term warfarin. And so Worf, when I tell people I work at Worf, usually the thing they know the best is warfarin, because it is the most widely prescribed blood thinner still to this day. Actually, I told that story to a doctor once, and he said that he had a patient who they couldn't understand why he kept coming in, because all they could see is that his blood wasn't coagulating. His coagulation numbers were very low. And long story short, they figured out his wife had been sprinkling warfarin on his cereal every morning, trying to take him out. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So it actually turned out not to be that dangerous. Dangerous for small rodents. Humans just kind of get sick. So I guess then the other story then is Mark Stahman, who in addition to Harold Campbell is on a number of the patents. And there's some disagreement here too. And I don't know, another one of these kind of he said, I guess you could say. But what's the disagreement that comes out?
Yeah, this was of the feuds, if you will, that Link had. This was probably the one that's the most, disappointing. Because Karl was a great advocate for his grad students, for his colleagues. I found a number of instances of that, and I record them in the book. But Stahman was a grad assistant. He's on the first dicumarol patent, and he's one of 3 that are patented that are on the warfarin patent. The third is Michio Okawa.
Michio Okawa, yeah.
Yeah, and Karl is the third. In 1952, Paul de Kroof, who was a scientist himself, also a really well-known science writer, wrote a long article about warfarin in Reader's Digest. And the headline was something like "No Hope for Rats" or "Goodbye Rats" or something like that. And Karl gave a long history of how warfarin as a rodenticide came into being. He mentioned numerous people, but he never mentioned Mark Stahman, who was one of the 3 on the patent. So that triggered, Stahman wrote a 27-page letter to the Worf Board of Trustees saying, look, I deserve some credit here, public credit for it. And I went down to Milwaukee because Stahman's daughter is still living, and she shared that long letter with me. So I was able to present Stahman's side in the book, which I think was important. It's very difficult to ascertain exactly where the breaking point was for those 2. There's instances where Stahman suggested maybe Link shouldn't be on the patent. I asked Hector DeLuca about that, and DeLuca said it's his lab. He's got to be on the patent. Anyway, it gets into kind of the minutia of it. I don't know if we want to go that far, other than that it was unfortunate and out of character, as I say, for Karl with any of his subordinates.
Yeah. Oh, and Stahman was leading the lab when he was in the sanitarium.
When he was in the sanitarium, but part of the deal, again, according to Karl, as it came out, was Stahman had agreed, because they had this friction by that time, to not continue studying anticoagulants. And Mark did.
Yeah, okay. So we don't really know the breaking point, but it does, if you put together all the controversies, like with the Scottish, with Irvine, it does seem to be there's issues where people in power are taking credit for things in ways that Karl doesn't think is justified.
I think that's true.
So yeah, that tells us the story. So then warfarin goes on to be the most widely prescribed blood thinner. It's also a very widely used rodenticide. But Karl's life also goes on. I think so. The another interesting part is the way that other aspects of his life, he was always engaged very passionately in things.
Yeah, he quite often took the underdog side, took the unpopular side. He was the faculty advisor for the Labor Youth League back in the 50s when McCarthy was in office, and that was not popular with the Board of Regents, certainly. And Karl had, he thought he's a scientist. Why should I be advising the Labor Youth League? No other faculty member would do it. And you needed one if you were going to be a recognized organization on campus. So a lot to admire there, in my opinion. And he did other things as well. And we should mention his wife, Elizabeth Link, was a remarkable woman in her own right, has a park named after her in downtown Madison, of course. The Women's International Peace, I can never remember the exact name of that organization, but Elizabeth had a very prominent role in that. They were both right out there.
And another one of those places where he was questioned was whether he was signing up for these student groups because he believed in the causes or just because he was a contrarian. But you found out that he was a...
I think he believed in them, and he certainly felt passionately about some of the individuals on the other side. Tom Link told me a story of coming home from high school. Would it have been 56? I'm not sure what year it was. Might have been, I think it might be 1956, and Tom was like 16 or something, and his dad poured him a shot of bourbon, and they toasted. And Tom said, "What for?" He said, "Joe McCarthy died today."
I think that covers all the major topics there. Are there other things you want to?
No, again, because of our setting here, I just want to reiterate, there would be no book if the UW archive did not exist here at Steenbock Library. And the librarians who were so helpful, even during COVID, when I couldn't come in here, I ended up getting we got a student who could come in and photocopy letters that Karl had written and got them to me. So again, just great thanks for that.
I can attest to that. It's a great archive. So I think we have a few more minutes here, 10 minutes till the buffet starts. But we do have a microphone for questions if anybody would like to ask any questions.
So my father was a biochemist at the University of Wisconsin and was a colleague of Karl Paul Link. And in going through, he died a number of years ago, and in going through my things, I found a number of things that Karl Paul Link had sent to my father because they communicated with each other often when there was something controversial going on campus. One of them was when Karl Paul Link, or whoever did it, gave Eisenhower's cardiologist the warfarin, and the cardiologist, who I can't remember the name, but he was a very famous cardiologist, not surprisingly, and he had a textbook, and Karl Paul Link, he sent Karl Paul Link a copy of the textbook, and my father, because he was an MD, PhD, Karl Paul Link gave him the textbook and said, "Here, Phil, you need this more than I do," which was ironic because my father, even though he had an MD, was not really a practicing physician. But when they would send, Karl Paul Link would send notes to my father, and they would come on an index card, and they always have the weather and the temperature, and I don't know, I remember what else, the time of day or something like that. It was, anyway.
Can you tell us your father's name? He was a professor, MD, PhD at UW?
Philip Cohen. He was a biochemist in the medical school. He was, anyway, he had his own history.
What was his first name?
Philip.
Phil Cohen? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
But yeah, that's one of the fun things about going through any papers that you have where somebody sent a paper, where Link sent them a letter, and you'll just come across this legal pad or this postcard. There's one that it was a copy of the Capital Times where he wrote the letter in the margins and was explaining like theories of nutrition and like eat brown bread and black coffee and things like that. So it's always a fun thing to discover. Other questions that people have?
So the question was, during Link's college and graduate school days, did he have any mentors of note, and how did they influence him?
I think the professor carbohydrate professor, Tottingham, was a big influence on him in his early career. Interesting to note, really, that whole department was like the old, you remember the Murderers Row of the Yankees, back. They had some top-notch scientists that weren't mentors necessarily to Karl, but were colleagues. I think what I mentioned a moment ago about his time in Europe with those two guys, Pregel and Kehrer?
Kehrer, yeah, Paul Kehrer.
That had a big effect on him. Interestingly, one of his students, Stanford Moore, one of Karl's students, so this is mentoring the other way, won a Nobel Prize. Karl twice won the Lasker Award, which is known, and I think there's one of them over in the display case there, widely regarded as sort of it's been called the American Nobel, and it's quite often a predecessor of someone actually winning the Nobel Prize, which of course Karl did not. But Mary Lasker of the family that gave that award reached out to him and said, I don't know if they know you got the first one, because he was like the only guy at that time, or the second guy, to get 2 Lasker Awards. And Karl, to his credits, in their conversation said, well, if there's a third one, he wanted him to credit Ovid Meyer, who was a doctor at UW Hospital. And it was Karl's way of saying that we, the scientists, need the clinicians to take our work and make it real, make it happen for people. So I thought that was an instance of his graciousness.
And I think one of the flashpoints in this Link-Steenbock rivalry was when Tottingham stepped down and they were disagreeing about how that should be handled. And so another case of him defending the people he cared about and that he respected.
Yes.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? We've got a few more minutes.
What happened to the royalties from this drug?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Walters on that.
I did actually write it down just in case the question came up. So there were 23 patents, about a dozen inventors named. There were $16.8 million in royalties in real dollars. That's the revenue that came in, not necessarily where it went. Adjusted for inflation, that's $143 million. And so the way that what WRF does is we take in the royalties, we invest the proceeds, and then those investments are what fund grants back to the university. Right now, they're about $150 million. It's been more than $4.5 billion adjusted for inflation. This is our 100th year. So that's kind of, long story short, is it went back to the university and it was spent there. And then 20% goes back to the inventors. So those dozen inventors, that 20% would have been split evenly among them. And so it was pretty well distributed there. So, and it would also depend on, for instance, the inventors who were named on the warfarin patent versus the dicumarol patent. Those patents would have been indexed differently. But yeah, so there's nothing, we can't sort of pin down precisely anything that the Link royalties went to, but they were part of the WRF investments and part of that. As it was mentioned in our introduction, buildings like this are built by WRF grants, and in part. We don't fund the whole building, but we make sure it's a great building. Thank you for that question.
Imagine funding university research. What a concept. No one would ever question that, right?
If we have time to go through anything else, I remember reading on the exhibit display that apparently Karl Paul Link got into a physical fight with Steenbock at least one occasion over the future leadership of the plant pathology department. And I'm a member of the plant pathology department, so I'd love to hear about that.
Well,
there's two, yeah. Okay. I was just going to say there's two potential fistfights. The way I understand the story is that, so plant pathology, I think, was Tottingham. So Tottingham had retired, and so Karl's very passionate about who's going to succeed him. And he and Steenbock got in an argument over what was going to happen. I don't know specifically, but they got an argument, and Steenbock apparently, they left they went to the men's faculty room, and Steenbock kept haranguing him about whatever his point was. And Link said, "Could you let me finish, please?" And then started threatening him. And Steenbock said, "Well, if you keep doing this, I'm going to call the authorities." And he said, "I don't care. I'll drag you out of here and beat you up in front of the authorities." So that gives you a sense of their, Steenbock's the one who appeals to the police, Link's the one who antagonizes them. I don't think that ever came to blows. I think that was just sort of a threat and it got close. But I think with Stallman though, there was some also.
Yeah, there was, again, but their versions differed. In Stallman's version, Link was the perpetrator. In Link's version, Stallman forced the issue. I did find a oral history interview with Henry Lardy, who was a prof or a researcher with Link, and he was in the lavatory when that happened, and at least in his version, it was they talked a mean game, but there were no blows exchanged. I think.
So another one of those mysteries that we just all heard the stories and Doug tracked down and demonstrated what did and did not happen there. One more question, yeah.
Yes, and I might be taking you astray here, but Worf keeps coming up in this discussion, and it is a very unusual thing of its time. There's nothing quite like it at other universities, and of course, Steenbock's story has everything to do with the difference between Babcock and Steenbock, a Babcock whose discovery fell into the public domain and nothing could come of it of benefit to the university. And then there is the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation that essentially had to be done almost without the permission of the university itself. Would you have any comment on Worf's role in all of these stories?
Well, I've got a dissertation you can read, but we're a little running on time. But yeah, Steenbock was the patent holder who founded Worf. Warfarin was the second big invention, and I think Babcock and Steenbock and Link. There's other personalities there. I think I guess maybe we can kind of go out of the story about how. So Link ended up having some tension with Worf as well. If you want to talk a bit about that.
Well. There's a video of Karl throwing corn cobs at a building, and it turns out it's the Worf headquarters. Yeah. But he appreciated Worf as well. He was a contrarian, and Worf could be authority, right? So.
Yeah, and he was drinking buddies with Ward Ross, who was the head of Worf, and those kind of things. But he also, he was not as somebody who sponsored the socialist student groups. You can imagine the capitalism of Worf was something that maybe he picked fights about.
But yeah, the point is really well taken, I think, because Worf at the time anyway was unique, the first, and how great that they were able to take what from Babcock's time went commercial without benefit coming back to the UW, right?
Well, and so Worf was the first of its kind, and it was founded at a time in which universities didn't know what to do with patents. And they saw it as a cost rather than a potential benefit. And so the reason Worf was created separately was because the university didn't know how to patent things. Other universities had like Toronto had patented insulin, and it was a one-off kind of a thing. Worf was the first time that it was like, we're going to go try to find other patents here. But the university didn't have that capacity, and so they recruited alumni to do that, which is the A in Worf. And then I think also it's founded at a time when, so Link was funded by the Brittingham Trust, and there was some question about whether the university could take private donations, because this was during the progressive era, and La Follette and those were questioning whether private money could be donated. And so part of the reason Worf was also founded is that it was kind of off to the side, and it was avoiding these questions. I think actually the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association, which is separate, was also founded because donors kind of wanted their money to go where they wanted it to go rather than getting involved in the politics of that. So that's how Worf became separate and why Worf ends up having invested capital. But I think it is interesting to compare that Link is kind of this maverick character, and Worf has this kind of maverick background in the same kind of way. So he was a kindred spirit in some ways and ran right up against Worf in other ways.
Right. Yeah.
I want to see if we have time for one more question, and you've had your hand up for a while.
And this is Tom Link, so.
This could be trouble.
Was dicumoril ever used clinically?
It was used clinically.
Was it successful?
I believe so, yes, yeah.
Oh yeah, as a anticoagulant, you bet. it didn't have the far-reaching, obviously, that warfarin did, but in its time, and again, it was early. This was the early 40s when it's patented. So, yeah.
So it's probably maybe 10 years, maybe a little less between. So for about 10 years, it is the best blood thinner on the market. So, yeah.
I think what Worf did as a result of Karl Paul Link was caused a major change in universities in response to what arrangements they would make with their faculty about research that they may discover. I think the Worf story had a lot of impact, and universities now are very cautious about just letting people go profit on their own. They can start their own company and make new profits, but if they do it on the university now, the universities all have some contractual obligations, and I think warfarin had a big impact on them.
Yeah, I think the method was proven with warfarin. Yeah. So I think we're out of time then. We're a little past time actually, but.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.